Nope. Tactical empathy. At first, I just cringed.
I think negotiation in its true form is actually about growing the pie.
That's a totally different way to approach
It's
conflict.
almost like you're outsourcing the problem solving that you have to do and putting it onto them.
If we bring a negotiator's mindset to what we do in our business, in our personal lives, with our partners,
Where the mind goes.
what is a time that you were in a negotiation and you felt coerced and you left just kind of feeling gross about it?
Every time a door-to-door salesman comes to my house.
Okay.
So in a previous life, I was in procurement, professional buyer, as they would call it. And you just get really good talking to salespeople, understanding sales tactics, and I'm very sensitive to them. So every time a door-to-door salesman comes to my house, I get the ick, as the Gen Z likes to call it. I'm very sensitive to the different persuasion tactics that salespeople use. And even if it's meant in a good way, for me, it feels very, best way to put it is salesy. So I'm as soon as I get that feeling that someone is trying to use sales tactics to persuade me, I immediately get red alarms go off in my head. And I usually shut down the conversation as quickly and politely as possible.
Okay. What is a time you were in a negotiation, and it could be around business or it could be around personal life, doesn't really matter, but you were in some sort of negotiation and you left feeling good about it?
So about 9 months ago, as I was starting my fitness coaching business, I invested several $1,000s into a coaching program. This organization that teaches online coaches how to build a 6-7 figure business around their online coaching. Um, I refer to it as coaches coaching coaches, right? Because it's very much this like, hey, I was a successful coach. Let me teach you how. But instead of it being one person, it was an organization. Anyway, the approach that took me from hearing about them to actually giving them thousands of dollars was very much on my own time. I sought them out originally, and through some of the sales calls that I was a part of, I had already built a knowledge, or I'd already built a base of trust with this organization. They had given me some free tools to use that I'd already implemented into my then new business. I had listened to the owner of the business talk on multiple very high level podcasts about what he does and why he does it. And I very much felt like the goal and the mission of the business was very much aligned to what I was trying to do. Right? They're very good at helping coaches make money and make a lot of money from coaching, and I was looking to make good money and a lot of money from coaching. Right? So I guess our goal was aligned in there. So the sales process was very easy, and even though I was very understanding of being in the middle of the sales process. It was a Black Friday sale. It was time sensitive, right? These sales tactics were still being used. Um, I didn't really feel like I was being sold because I felt like the goal that they had was very much aligned to the goal that I had.
Okay. Say that again. So what was the fundamental difference? You just said it right there.
The fundamental difference was that when a door-to-door salesman comes to my house, I have no clue what their goal is, right? Are they trying to make a quick buck? Are they really trying to help me save money? I don't feel like we're aligned.
What do you feel like a door-to-door salesperson could do differently? What's the fundamental switch they could make when they get to your door?
I think the main goal for a door-to-door salesman, it shouldn't be to sell. I think it should be to make it aware that their business exists, and let them know that when they're ready, that this business is here to help them. Because I don't think people make decisions based off of being, limited on time or being able to save a bunch of money. I think people make decisions based off of whether or not there's a desire to have the outcome that that person is selling or not. And I think that comes on people's own time, right? In the former, right, when a door-to-door salesman comes to my house, I'm not ready to make a purchase. When I spent thousands of dollars on the coaching program, I was ready to make a purchase.
Something I'm wondering about too, listening to these stories is I I wonder how much of it was you were ready to make a purchase versus just how that person on the other side of the table spent time connecting with you versus not.
Huh. That's interesting. So, if to kind of elaborate on the coaching program that I'd purchased, I had had multiple calls,
Yeah.
one-on-one calls with the salesperson. Actually, the first call wasn't even really a sales call. It was really more of a, here's what we're looking to sell and here's the deadline. And they didn't even really pitch me on it. The only thing they did pitch me on, and I think this is very smart, was to set up another call with me so that I could have time
Yeah.
to think about it, right? There was no sense of urgency. There was no do this now or it'll go away. Even though there still was, there was a, hey, this is a Black Friday sale. And at the end of the day, it's going to go away. It was, here's the deadline. Here's the price. You let me know when you're ready. And that felt very comforting to me, right? It felt like
Hmm.
they were really trying to align themselves with what my pain points were and what my problem was in that situation.
Do you feel like you could almost boil down the difference between the two is one spent time building relationship and connecting with you and having a sense of empathy for you, and the other one just came in trying to swing the thing they were trying to sell and hit you over the head with it?
Oh, 100%. I mean, even with the fact that I had listened to the CEO on podcasts before, right? That was the company building trust with me. That was the company empathizing with me, right? It was much easier to jump into a sales call when they had already built that trust with me.
100%. 100%. So this is all really connecting dots for me when I think about the book I just finished actually for a second time, because I loved it so much, but I needed some time to like digest it and then come back to it, which is called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. So many people have read it. I know this is not like a secret new book that's up and coming. It's been out for a while. I know that you've also read it a little while back. But something that is really hitting me about this book in my own life is this idea of practical, concrete tools of how to build relationships and build authentic empathy with people while we're also trying to navigate and negotiate conflict. And conflict sometimes could be something as simple as literally just trying to sell something to somebody. That could be in some ways a conflict, right? You both want something and you're trying to figure out how do we figure that out together. That to me is how I define negotiation through a conflict. Or it could be something with a partner about, the tasks you're trying to do in a house or when to meet with a friend. Like those are all like microcosms of negotiation and a conflict, right? um, but something that I think really hit me from the book was he kept saying this idea, tactical empathy. And at first I just cringed. I just cringed when I heard that. The idea of turning empathy into like a weapon. I just hated that idea.
Yeah, and it sounds almost over marketing of just a very simple and practical idea, right? I think a lot of times books do this too, where they try to make what is a relatively simple concept more complex by creating a catchy, buzzwordy title for the same thing, right?
True. No, that then yeah, lots of books do that because it's easier to sell the idea, and I understand why people do it. Um, but the more he actually talked about it, the more I found myself, even though my initial response was to cringe, actually really liking what he was trying to say. And the big takeaway I had from him was, you know, negotiation and conflict are parts of everyday life. And a lot of the old school around how do you navigate conflict or how you negotiate and get what you want is how do you get what you want at the expense of the other person and in spite of the other person.
Hmm.
And I feel like what Chris Voss and his book is really trying to say through this idea of tactical empathy is if you really genuinely spend enough time with whoever is sitting across the table from you and you practice some of the ideas in the book of how to really build trust in an authentic way. And he really emphasized that it's not about fake, it's not fake building trust, it's genuine trust. His favorite currency, he always says, is integrity, right? He really believes in integrity in the negotiating table. So, how do you really authentically build trust and listen and get to understand deeply the person that's sitting across the table from you, whether that is a potential customer, whether that is your partner, whether that is your parents? It doesn't matter. If you could really listen and empathize and understand them, there is almost always an opportunity to draw some dotted lines from what they really want, which I think comes back to what you were talking about in terms of alignment, what they really want and what you really want. And where is that kind of magical sweet spot in between those places? And a lot of times I think even in conflict with people, we're often way more aligned than we realize. But because our kind of defense mechanisms are up, we often can't even see that solution that's just sitting right in front of us, because we're defensive or resistant or whatever. And so I think what's beautiful about the tactics in this book that I really wanted to talk to was mirroring and labeling. There are ways to kind of bring down some of those defense mechanisms and help us really connect through some of those resistances that we might get in a conflict. Do you remember mirroring and labeling?
I am familiar with that. Can you give me a little more detail though?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So mirroring really takes advantage of this idea of mirror neurons that are in all of our brains, right? It's our tendency to want to mimic the people around us. It's just something built into our evolutionary biology. And so you're essentially leaning into that neuroscience hack that's built into our brains to mirror the people around us. And the reason we do that from a biological standpoint is it builds connection. You'll find that two people that are really close and having a nice conversation sometimes will mirror each other's body language, right?
Mm.
They might, as they're walking, their stride or their way their arms are swinging might slowly become in sync, and it's subconscious, right? That's those mirror neurons at work trying to bring us to closeness and essentially build intimacy, right? Not sexual intimacy, but like emotional intimacy, right? And so mirroring is a way to intentionally do this. And so, for example, maybe you share something with me. Maybe just share like a short story with me. Go.
I had rice and ground beef for lunch today, and it was really good, but I almost didn't have time to make it. So I had to tell my podcast co host buddy that I needed to be 15 minutes late to our recording session in order to be able to make my food and eat it.
15 minutes late?
Well, I guess I was probably more like 10 minutes late at the end of the day.
So did you see what I did there? Right. I didn't repeat everything. I just repeated a section of what you had said, and I used an upward inflection, almost like a question at the end. And I didn't I didn't even actually technically ask a question. I just mirrored a piece of what you said back to you, and you naturally added more. And so mirroring is a way to, one, get yourself to actually listen. Because often when we're sitting and listening to someone, our brains are going somewhere else. But if we're focused on mirroring, we pay more attention to what the person's actually saying. And so it allows us to draw them out and get them to continue to share and feel safe sharing. So that's the first part. That's mirroring. Labeling is when you say, it sounds like, or it seems like you might have felt this way. You're trying to actually guess and intuit how the other person is feeling or thinking based on what they've just shared. And sometimes you'll get it right, sometimes you'll get it wrong, and you'll get better the more you practice. But the act of doing that, more than anything, makes people feel super heard. Because even if you get it wrong, it shows that you are paying attention at a certain level and you're trying to understand. And then if you're wrong, they'll correct you. And that you learn a lot from just that.
Yeah. So give me an example of this. I'm struggling to connect.
Yeah, so you just shared that story. So a way to label instead of mirror at the end of what you just shared would be, it sounds like you were feeling kind of stressed about being late.
No, not really. I was actually more stressed about being able to eat and not be hungry while we were talking and being distracted because of that. And I just didn't want to, I also didn't want to delay our conversation too much because I was kind of excited to have it.
That was even more powerful than the mirror. I just learned, one, that my assumption was incorrect without me being mean or like saying something because of my assumption or being defensive, right? I just said, it sounds like maybe this is what's going on. And you were like, no, actually, this is what's going on. So again, these two tools, when it comes to negotiation empathy, you learn a lot about the person sitting in front of you. You pay far more attention, and they feel far more like you actually give a crap about them and you're listening and wanting to understand, right? So that's mirroring and labeling. Um, where I get curious is At what point does mirroring and labeling move from those two examples you gave, right? When we're talking about negotiation, you know, what was the difference between that person you bought from that you would listen to the podcast to for your, business coaching training versus the salesperson that came to the door? I'm guessing that salesperson that came to the door did not use any mirroring and labeling tactics. They just talked to you.
Yeah, I would say that's the case. I don't know. It feels like if someone comes to my door, I don't know. It's a very real example of not knowing if I'm able to trust them or not. Like I feel like how am I supposed to trust some guy I've never met that's showing up at my house? It's always, you get a little defensive when you're at your house too. I think that's part of just a challenge of door-to-door salesmen in general. Someone's coming onto my property that I've never met, trying to, and I don't know if I can trust this person yet, right? The other example was a lot of trust had been built. There had been trust built over months, right? Through listening to their content and consuming their information, understanding that this was a unique time, that they're going to have a good deal, and they did a good job marketing their deal. There was a lot of trust that was built that this is an organization that I want to do business with. And at the end of the day, I think it just really comes down to that. I think it comes down to understanding, do I trust this person? I guess, or are we aligned on our goals, right? The goal that I don't know what the goal of a door-to-door salesman is. Are they trying to one up, just make a quick buck? Are they really invested in trying to help me? And I mean, it's hard for me to even guess that they care about helping me. They never met me, and they're just, only reason they're coming to solicit me is because I live next door to the house they just solicited, right? But the other example, I mean, yeah, a lot of trust had been built. I had no question that whether the advice that I got from them was helpful or not, their intent was to help me, and that they have already given me a ton of proof that they're good at helping people like me. So that trust had been built over many months.
I think you're hitting at another piece that, as you're talking about, I remember Chris Voss talking a lot about in his book, which is really not being in a rush and always kind of being comfortable walking away from the table. You know, you never want to walk away from the table having made a bad deal for either of you. And, having a sense of urgency in the negotiation will usually harm the negotiation. I think, he was an FBI negotiator for hostages, right? And so there is a built-in sense of urgency. But even with those, in his stories, there are some negotiations that took weeks. Some even, it seemed like he was saying, took months. And that's kind of what I'm hearing for you with this more successful sale that essentially happened, that you even acknowledged like salesy tactics that normally would trigger you, right? But you were comfortable with them. And I think the reason for that is they had built trust, they weren't in a rush, and they spent time. And I when I think about that in our lives, like when we talk about, mindset that we want to bring to our life, if we bring a negotiator's mindset to what we do in our business and our personal lives with our partners, I'm wondering if the power there is focusing on building trust, building empathy over time, not being in a rush, really spending enough time to understand what somebody's goals are, what they really want, and then how can you align and draw the dotted line between what you want and what they want, in an empathetic way.
This idea of negotiating within relationships is interesting. I feel like we need a different brand. I feel like negotiations needs a rebrand, or like a new marketing campaign, because I feel like it just gets a really negative rap. I feel like people think negotiations is trying to get the most of the pie, right? Of a zero sum game. And I just think that's a really weak way of thinking about negotiation. I think negotiation in its true form is actually about growing the pie. It's really about how do we both get as much of this infinite share of pie as we possibly can. And I think maybe that's where the trust comes in, right? Is I think it takes a lot of time to just build trust with someone and go, okay, hey, I'm not trying to screw you over here. I'm trying to, in the case of selling a product, I'm trying to sell my product to you, because I actually think it's really going to help you. And here are the reasons why. And here's some examples of how it's helped other people like you. And here's a quick snippet of it that you can get a little taste of how it's going to help you. Right. These are all things that now, having gone through this coaching program, I've learned as an online coach, hey, this is how you get someone who's never heard of you to trust you enough to become your client. Is you have to build this trust with them by proving that you know what you're talking about, and that you're proving that your system works and has worked for people like them, giving them a trial or a little piece of what your program looks like or what your service looks like, and then saying, hey, try this out and let me know if you like it. Right. This is all different ways of building trust. And that's just from a business standpoint. But when you think about it from like a relationship standpoint, it's kind of the same thing. It's like, hey, um, with my wife, there's times where we're negotiating on everything from as small as where should we go for dinner to where should we go for our anniversary to what do we want our life to look like going forward. I mean, thinking about those as a negotiation, some people might go, oh, that means you're trying to get your way over and with or that means you're trying to get your way in expense of someone else's way. But it really means, hey, I'm trying to make sure we're both happy here. Where's this unique middle ground of what I think is a good idea and what you think is a good idea, and how do we figure out a way to build trust with each other that, hey, we're just trying to figure out where that middle ground is. Right. I think that's where a lot of relationships struggle, is they don't know how to negotiate, or they haven't spent time building that trust. And just thinking about it from a negotiation standpoint and having a negotiation mindset in relationships is just not something I've spent too much time thinking about.
Something else that really struck me in the book that really lit a light bulb for me in my coaching business as well is in Never Split the Difference, Chris Voss talks about something called calibrated questions. And calibrated questions are essentially using open-ended how or what questions to learn more about the person sitting across from you in the negotiation, and or making them think they have control over the negotiation and guiding them to what you really want. At least that's the way he frames it. So, it might be, for example, you're trying to get somebody to come over to your house. They've said that they don't want to come over at 5, and you might say, I really want to hang out today. I miss you. I'm unfortunately busy from 8 until 5. The only time I'm free is after 5. How can we find a way to hang out? And what that does is, rather than me telling them what to do, it gives their brain the opportunity to solve the problem for us. And it might not actually result in us meeting exactly when I want. And in reality, it probably won't. But they might be, well, I can't come over at 5 today, but I could come over at 5 tomorrow. You know what I mean? And so then what I find is these how and what questions, they open up new solutions we never even knew were possible, because we were in this very binary thinking. And really where this light bulb strikes for me is in the coaching world, they also train you as a professional certified coach to ask how or what questions of your client. They're always encouraging you and reminding you your job is never to tell your client what to do. It is to give your client vision and inspiration for the life that they want to have, and then to ask them how or what probing questions, they call them, or powerful questions, to help them find their own solutions. And I think there's some magic here. There's something in our biology that when we get asked an open-ended how or what question, suddenly problems that felt intractable, unsolvable, immovable, our natural human creativity comes into play and helps us solve the problem together. And I think there's just something about that, not only in negotiating with other people in our lives, whether it's business or personal, but also in how we solve our own problems. Like, what if instead of being like, well, I just don't know if I should do A or B, what if we sat down even with a journal and said, how could I solve this problem acknowledging C, D, and F barrier? That's a totally different way to approach conflict.
I use this tactic a lot in negotiations when I was in my procurement role. Without giving too much detail, I was negotiating over, computer parts, and pretty high dollar computer parts, right? And a lot of times we would get, specific to certain suppliers, we would get this result, or this answer of the price is what the price is, right? And with these really strategic negotiations, my supplier knows what our outcome is, what our goal is for the overall price of a computer, right? But they're selling us a piece of the computer that they know there's no way we're going to be able to price our computer at a certain price and make the margin we're looking off of. So one of my favorite tactics to use, and I don't know if I got this from the book, it was probably even before I read it, was basically, how are we supposed to get to this end price point when you're giving us a price that makes it impossible for us to meet this? And what I noticed is that something, even just asking a question like that, would flip the problem that we had to solve almost around to being like, now this is your problem to solve. And they would have to go with, well, you can't raise the price, but we're hoping that you can make concessions on some of these other things that I personally didn't have any power over the price of it. And they'd be like, and maybe you can save some money over there. And then I would respond with, how am I supposed to get money off of a product that I'm not even in charge of? And basically this kind of rambling of answers until they would almost just acknowledge that, yeah, we're giving you a price that's a little too high. And then we'd start getting into conversations of how we can lower the price after market and rebates and certain pricing structures, blah, 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 blah. But it would almost take a couple tries of being like, how is that possible, right? For them to really even get into this, like, all right, well, maybe we can give some concessions and helping and things like that.
You're almost word for word what he says in the book. His favorite question is to ask, how am I supposed to do that? And that's
Yeah.
almost exactly, it's your version of your flavor of that question. And I think it's powerful. I mean, even in a recent Instagram reel that I posted, that's essentially what I was saying. When, a boss or coworker comes and asks you to do something that you should say no to, and you're feeling stressed and burned out and you struggle to say no, you essentially say, I'd love to do that for you, but I've got this and this and this. I just don't really know how it's possible. How could I make that happen for you, acknowledging these other things? And I find, again, these how questions, when you turn them back around on people, it's essentially forcing them to have empathy for you.
So I would do the same thing when I was working in corporate as well. My go-to line, and again, I must have gotten these from, because this sounds way too similar to the book for me not to have. And of course, it's been a while for me, but how am I supposed to do that and insert thing they also told you to do, right? That was always my go-to line, was, how am I supposed to do that and get this report into you by the end of the day? How am I supposed to do that and prioritize this contract that we're supposed to be working on? That question always it's almost like you're outsourcing the problem solving that you have to do and putting it onto them. And it's very powerful. I like that. I didn't, but this idea that that's a negotiation isn't something I don't think I ever connected that dot, that's a negotiation right there. You're trying to get the outcome that you want, and they're trying to get the outcome that I want. And the only thing in the way is answering this question of, how are we supposed to do both of these? If you answer that for me and it makes sense, then cool, we'll both get what we want. But
And that's negotiation, right? Like I don't I think that's where this idea of tactical empathy, even though I had the ick initially, is actually a beautiful thing.
mhm,
Because sometimes people are not spending the time to empathize with you, right? They're not seeing the challenges that you're trying to navigate, sometimes for your own gain, but also sometimes even for theirs, especially if it's your boss. Like, a lot of the
mhm.
times you're doing a lot of things, and if you take on the extra thing they've asked, it's going to harm the other things that your boss actually cares more about. And if you don't ask that how question, they won't realize that. And some people just instinctively will say no and be defensive if you tell them something, right? So this how question, I think, just circumnavigates that defense mechanism and allows them to realize the thing you've already realized. Um, so this, to me, brings home this unanswered question that I have for myself around this idea of negotiation, because I think negotiation is powerful. I think it's beautiful. I think it can be a really positive force in our lives, both personally and professionally. And yet, I'm not sure where the line between persuasion and manipulation is. When does a negotiation move from being tactful empathy to coercion? And when is it appropriate to use these more advanced negotiation techniques versus inappropriate?
I think the simple answer is when the trust has been built, right? I think I think you really need to align the goals between the two parties or whoever is negotiating really before you can use these tactics. If you don't, that's where this feeling of being salesy comes in, or this feeling of being manipulated or persuaded, right? I think the less trust that is built, the more persuasion that is felt. And by nature, that's going to want to push you away from making a negotiation happen whatsoever, right? I think, like we said, aligning on a goal and saying, hey, you and I both have, we both almost want the same outcome, right? We're just trying to figure out how we can make that happen, right? A simple example of a used car salesman, they want to sell you a car. You want to buy a car. The goal is aligned. When the negotiation doesn't happen is when one person feels like they're getting taken advantage of, right? If you feel like the price is too high and that they're trying to take advantage of you, then you're not going to buy from them. And subsequently, if they feel like you're trying to manipulate them and, just bottom line the price and everything like that, they're not going to want to do business with you either. So once the goal is aligned, once the trust is built, then I think the negotiation tactics feel a lot more like someone trying to help you than someone trying to hurt you.
Where the mind goes.